I'm on a quest to 100% complete every game in the Legend of Zelda series. I've already conquered the two NES titles, so now it's time to move on to one of my favorite games of all time, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. So I'm sure almost everyone has at least heard of this game, and you may be tired of hearing how great it is. Well, I'm sorry, but it really is just so great. So much of what made the Zelda series what it is came from this game that, even though it's the third game in the series, I almost consider this to be the first true Legend of Zelda game. Like with Zelda II, I have actually 100% completed this game before. And actually, the most recent playthrough was only a few months ago, and that's what inspired me to do this series. Even though I last played it not very long ago, I always love playing A Link to the Past, so I'm ready to play it again. But before I get started, if you enjoy this video, please leave a like and consider subscribing. And now, let's get started. Seeing as this game is much larger and much more in-depth than Zelda 1 or 2, the completion requirements here are a bit more complicated. Of course, we have the usual: get all the dungeon maps, compasses, and big keys, complete all the dungeons, get all the hearts, and get all of the dungeon items. However, we also need to temper the Master Sword and level it up from the fairy in the Dark World. We need to upgrade our shield and boomerang at the Waterfall of Wishing. We need to max out our bombs and arrows at the Pond of Happiness. And we need to upgrade our magic meter. And of course, we also need to defeat Ganon. So yeah, we have a lot to do here, so let's get started. Like many Zelda games, it starts with Link sleeping. As our uncle goes out, we get up and grab the lantern before following him to the castle. We find the secret entrance and quickly come across our uncle, badly wounded in the passage. We take up his sword and shield and carry on with the mission to rescue Princess Zelda. As we make our way through the castle, we find the boomerang, and I have to say, it's really nice that we get one of the best items in the game so early. Down into the dungeons we go, and we find the captive Princess Zelda. We make our way out of the castle through the secret underground passages, and at the sanctuary, I get the first heart container. With Zelda temporarily safe, I head to Kakariko, where there's actually a lot I can do right away. I can get a couple of heart pieces pretty easily, along with 2 of the 4 bottles, the bug net, and the bombs. Yeah, seriously, there's so much I can do here without even setting foot in a dungeon. Well, after that, it's time to head to the Eastern Palace, and naturally, it's very easy. I got the map, compass, big key, and bow. Then, onto the boss. Now, this is a really memorable and iconic boss, the Armos Knights. Armed with my bow, it was a simple matter to defeat them. Although, when the final one turned red and starts smashing around, I usually just spin attack him, since sometimes attacking with the bow can be kind of slow. With the first pendant in hand, I returned to Sahasrahla, where he gave me the Pegasus boots, and then all the way back across the map I go. I got the Book of Medora in Kakariko, and I easily won the 15-second race minigame for a heart piece. Then I just had a couple more odds and ends to take care of before Dungeon 2. I headed east to Lake Hylia, where I got the Ice Rod. Now, I did this now because otherwise I would probably forget about it since I almost never use it in the game. And on my way back, I got the piece of heart from draining the pond here. And that made 4, so I got another heart container, so that was good. Also, I remembered this heart in the northeast part of the desert, and I often forget about this one, so it's good that I got it right away. And then, onto the dungeon. Like the first dungeon, this one really isn't too hard. Although, I will admit, I forgot about this trap room. Yeah, you get nothing in here, it's literally just a trap. Also, I was pretty proud of myself for perfectly running through these bullets, although that was only one way, coming back wasn't nearly as smooth. Well, I made my way past the annoying sand trap guys and got my power glove. Then, outside to lift the rocks blocking the entrance to the other part of the dungeon. Oh, and I did remember that there's this heart piece on the cliff south of the dungeon here. Back in the dungeon, I discovered something actually really annoying about this game. Now, this was the introduction of having rooms with floor tiles that would fly around and hit you. And that's a booby trap that's been in a number of games in the series at this point. However, unlike some of the other games, in this game, your shield doesn't actually protect you from them. So your options are to swing your sword or just dodge and weave. And yeah, it's not too hard, it's just kind of an interesting, annoying observation that you can't block them in this. This boss is just annoying. I've never been good at it. Although, look at this final hit I got on him. Wasn't that beautiful, how my spin attack just pushed me out of the way of those rocks? Well, we now had 2 pendants, and I was actually feeling pretty good. especially since now with the power gloves I could head north and get the flippers, and luckily I already had tons of rupees. Now with the flippers I could actually start upgrading some of my items like my shield and boomerang, and I could go to Lake Hylia and start upgrading my bomb and arrow capacities. And of course, while I was in the area, I remembered to get the bottle from under the bridge. Well, I eventually had to head to the third dungeon, but on the way I made a little detour into the Lost Woods. And this was mainly for the toadstool, but also because there was actually a heart piece there that I completely forgot to get earlier when I was in Kakariko. It's a good thing that I got it now before the dungeon, as it was easy enough to complete a new heart container. I still wanted to delay going to the next dungeon, so after getting the magic mirror, I explored Death Mountain a bit, and I did actually get another heart piece. And I discovered that I am rather pathetic when it comes to fighting these mini Moldorms. But anyway, on to the dungeon. And this sucked again because I had to deal with the dumb floor tiles that I just couldn't block. Here I got the Moon Pearl, so I would actually be able to explore the Dark World. And of course, I got the map, compass, and big key. Then on to Moldorm, and I hate this guy in every game that he's in. But a miracle happened this time. I actually beat him without getting knocked off a single time. I have no idea how I managed that, but I was so happy. Well, with all 3 pendants in hand, I headed back to the Lost Woods where I obtained the legendary Master Sword. Then, after receiving a telepathic message warning me that soldiers had found Zelda in the sanctuary, I made my way back to Hyrule Castle to confront Agahnim. The trip through the castle was actually rather simple, even if it was still tedious, especially since I really hate these ball and chain soldiers. Oh, and something funny actually happened here. Somehow, after I knocked this soldier off the path, I somehow accidentally knocked him back onto the path. It was actually kind of funny. Well, I reached Agahnim, and I defeated him with ease. Then, welcome to the Dark World! Since I couldn't really do much else yet, I headed straight for the Palace of Darkness in the east. The monkey helped me open the door, and I went in. I got the hammer with ease, and the rest of this dungeon went super easy, probably because this is the dungeon that I know the best in this game. Something else of note with this dungeon is that it's a good one for getting lots of rupees, but they seem to have some weird hitboxes and I actually had a really hard time picking them up here. Well, anyway, with the map, compass, key, and hammer in hand, I headed for the boss. And I wanted to point out something that took me ages to figure out on my first playthrough. Here, it looks like you hit a dead end. However, if you use your bow to shoot the eye of the statue, a path opens up. And seriously, that took me so long to figure out when I first played this game. The boss here is a classic, and I just love this fight. Although, I wasn't being very careful, and I actually ended up needing to use a fairy here. That dungeon being complete, I decided to get distracted again before going to the next dungeon. First, I went to give the toadstool to the witch so I could get the magic powder. And then I went north a bit, and I got the Quake Medallion. Now, my next stop was back in Lake Hylia. I wanted to upgrade the bombs and arrows more, and I actually managed to fully upgrade the capacities for both of them. And here's a neat piece of trivia. After you get all the upgrades, if you continue to give rupees to the fairy, she'll return them and tell you about her friend in the Waterfall of Wishing. That's the one that I already visited earlier to upgrade my shield and boomerang. Alright, well, I had a couple more errands to run. I got an overworld heart piece from south of Kakariko Village, and I got the ocarina. Then I had to do that stupid digging minigame, since unfortunately that's how you get one of the heart pieces. Somehow though, I got insanely lucky, and I got the heart piece on only my 3rd attempt. I also managed to make a nice little profit, so that's good. My last stop was to get the Bombos Medallion, and then onto the dungeon. Unfortunately, I got a little careless, and I almost died. Turns out these orange idiots do 2 hearts of damage if they hit you. And I must say, boy, this game really is stressful when you have low health. Despite that, I obtained the map, big key, and the hook shot. I actually almost forgot about the compass, but thankfully I checked my map and I saw I hadn't been into the room where it was. And wow, the hook shot makes dealing with these bears so much easier. And can I point out how cool it is to have a door hidden behind a waterfall? It's awesome! Well, boss time, and thankfully this one is very simple. Something cool this game has that the previous two in the series didn't is actual lore and story in the game. In the NES titles, the only story was learned by reading the manuals. Here, you actually learn about the lore and history of Hyrule after every dungeon, and I think that's just awesome. One of the best parts about the usage of a dark world in this game is the fact that the geography is slightly different in each world, and this allows for some cool spots where you can go through the dark world to reach someplace in the light world that you couldn't before. So like here, I was able to get a heart piece and actually complete a heart container by reaching a spot in the light world that was completely inaccessible before. I just love that. At this point, I went to Kakariko where I got the magic upgrade and the warp bird. Then, time for the Thieves Hideout. Now, I know this isn't actually the third Dark World dungeon based on the numbers on the map, but I decided I want to get the Titan's Mitt right away. And boy, I hate this dungeon. The beginning part is just so confusing and disorienting, and it has a bunch of these stupid sparkles that turn you into a bunny. Well, despite not liking it, I made my way through, getting the map, compass, and key. I made sure to bomb the floor here, which is actually one of the coolest parts of this dungeon. It lets light into the boss room so that the boss actually reveals himself. Down in the basement, I find this totally not suspicious prisoner girl, and I get the Titan's Mitt. So now boss time. And this guy is kind of annoying, and on my first time playing, it took me a while to beat him. However, since I've played this game so much, it really wasn't that big of an issue this time. Now that I have the Titan's Mitts, I can get the tempered sword. While my sword was being tempered, I decided to take this chest, and I headed south to get it unlocked. Oh, and it's actually kind of funny, Link has a stabbing animation even when he doesn't have a sword. Well, I got the chest unlocked, and I got the last bottle. Then I returned to get my new, more powerful Master Sword. And with that and the Titan's Mitts, I decided to go exploring. First, I went and got the Magic Cape. Then I headed back up Death Mountain to get the Ether Medallion. And afterwards, I actually had fun exploring the maze of caves running through Death Mountain, despite the stupid Tektites. I went and retrieved the Cane of Burna, although in my opinion it's kind of useless as I never use it. But still, it's required for completion. Although it's kind of annoying, I ran out of magic power here, so I actually had to use a fairy to get out of this room. Now here's a cool example of the sort of overworld puzzle that makes Zelda so great. We need to reach that ledge over there, but there's nothing for us to attach the hookshot to. Well, it turns out that using the Ether Medallion will reveal an invisible path. I always thought that was so cool, especially since it leads to a heart piece, which is always nice. Alright, well, my next stop is to the dungeon in the forest. However, I'm not actually trying to beat it here. I really just care about getting the fire rod so that I can go and get the blue mail. This dungeon I've always had mixed feelings about. On the one hand, it's actually really cool how you have to find different entrances around the forest to navigate it. On the other hand, wall masters. They suck in this game. They're nothing like Zelda 1 where they're slow, or in Ocarina of Time where they just take forever to fall. Here, if you don't keep moving, they're going to grab you. Side note, the Bombos Medallion is so overpowered. After getting the fire rod, I definitely wanted to get the blue mail. So I headed to Lake Hylia and I found the portal into the Dark World that's at the dungeon. And here we have ice physics. Like, seriously, does anyone actually like ice physics in games? Well, this is another example of a dungeon that's not really too hard, but it's just tedious. Especially because of this room with the stupid moving floor. Despite all that, I got the map, compass, and the key. And then finally, I got the blue mail. With that, I was way less likely to get game over, so I became much more confident. I decided to keep going through this dungeon since I was already here, and in the process, I found one of the best uses for the magic cape. Like seriously, it makes getting through here way easier. And I realized this feels like just such a long dungeon. Maybe it was just because of all the time I spent slipping on ice, I don't know, but it just took a long time. Soon, however, I was above the boss room, and yes, I fell for this trap of a bunch of enemies under the block, kind of embarrassing. The boss itself was, of course, very easy, and just like that, another dungeon was complete. Next, I was going to head to the swamp dungeon, but on the way there, I did remember to get this heart piece just northwest of the dungeon. And actually, this is another one that I usually forget about, so I'm glad I remembered it while I was here. Well, on to the dungeon. And this one introduces Wizrobes to the game. Now, I hated these guys in Zelda 1, but in this game, they're so much easier to deal with. Really, Zelda 1 is actually the only game where they're kind of terrible now that I think about it. An enemy that's actually surprisingly difficult to deal with are these slug guys. Like, seriously, they do so much damage. I actually needed to use a fairy here, which was also kind of embarrassing. Now, I feel that this is generally a pretty generic dungeon. Most of it never really sticks in my mind. Really, the one exception is this torch puzzle. You need to light torches in 2 different rooms in order to open a path in a 3rd room, and I always thought that was pretty cool. For some reason, I was having a really hard time with this boss. Part of it was I just couldn't hit the small eyeballs, but also his lightning attack is just annoying and it's really not easy to dodge. You just have to hope that it doesn't hit you. But even with my difficulties, I did manage to defeat him. Well, here's another reason that I like to do these dungeons out of order. After you complete dungeons 5 and 6, you can go in the Dark World to where Link's house would be in the Light World. Now, prior to this, there's a merchant selling just plain old bombs. However, now you can also buy a giant bomb. This will follow you around until you place it, and it's used to blow a hole in the pyramid in the center of the map, so that you can reach a fairy. If you throw your bow into this fairy's pond, she'll give you silver arrows, which you actually need to defeat Ganon. However, if you throw your sword in, she'll actually upgrade it for you. So I always like doing dungeons 5 and 6 in the Dark World as soon as I can so that I can upgrade my sword before finishing the other dungeons. Before going to the rest of the dungeons, I decided to go and get the remaining heart pieces. The first was actually a really easy one that I don't know how I forgot about it until this point. If you go to the Dark World where the smith's house would be in the Light World, there's a bunch of stakes in the ground. If you hit them all with your hammer, a secret passage with the heart opens. Next, I had to get one from the stupid chance game in Outcast Village. And this is almost as annoying as the one from the digging minigame. Luckily, it didn't take that long to get this time. And then the last heart piece, at least before the one in the Turtle Rock dungeon, was in the desert. And this was another example of using the geography in the Dark World to navigate the Light World. And again, it's just such a cool concept. Well, now that I got everything that I could in the overworld, it was time to go and finish the dungeons. I headed back into the forest in the Dark World since I never beat it before, I just got the fire rod and left. And I still don't like the stupid wall masters in this dungeon. Although I do really like this room with the maze under the bridge, it's kinda cool. Now, I made my way to the boss, and oh my goodness, this guy is hard. I actually ran out of magic, and for some reason, I just couldn't hit him with my sword. I was quickly running out of fairies, but luckily, I remembered that using the magic mirror in a dungeon, even at the boss, will warp you back to the entrance of the dungeon. It's kinda like a portable wall master. So I used the mirror and escaped to go and heal. Now, when I returned, I still barely defeated him, but it's fine, I'd managed to do it. Now, all that was left was Turtle Rock. This is a pretty unique dungeon with all these platforms that you create using the Cane of Samaria, and I love these rolling spike bars. Oh, and also, you can't forget these pipes Link has to travel through, like a better version of Super Mario. I got the mirror shield pretty quickly, and besides the red mail, that's actually the last item in the game. And all that was left was the compass for this dungeon, which I had forgotten about until after I beat the boss, and one last heart piece. Oh, and I found a weird thing. In this room, you have to defeat all the enemies before you can push this block, just like in Zelda 1. However, I think this is the only room in this entire game that's like that. Just thought it was weird. The worst part of this dungeon is this stupid platform maze in the dark room. It just sucks. Really, the only way to get through here without taking too much damage is to use the magic cape. Naturally, I realized towards the end of this dungeon that I had actually missed the last heart piece, so I had to go back for it. And yeah, this one's actually weird that the only way to get it is to navigate through the dungeon, and in this section where you go outside, you need to use the magic mirror to go to the Light World to find this heart piece. It's very convoluted and very easy to miss, but I have to admit, it is probably the most satisfying heart piece to find for the first time, just because of how difficult it is to get. Alright, boss time. Now, this one's actually really cool with the elemental heads that you need to hurt with your fire and ice rods. And thinking about it, this boss probably would have actually fit in really well in Tears of the Kingdom. With that boss defeated, we finally recovered Princess Zelda, although we're not quite ready to take on Ganon just yet. First, I made sure to go back into the dungeon, and I did get the compass. Now it was finally time to make our way to Ganon's tower. Side note, on the way there, I took note that the Lionels in this game are so much easier than in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, although, to be fair, they're not really that hard to fight in either of those games either. Alrighty, Ganon's tower. So, I have to say, for a final dungeon, it feels pretty generic. Not that that's really a bad thing. However, it does have one cool thing that makes it feel like an actual final dungeon. And that's the fact that you refight a handful of the bosses from other dungeons just randomly in the middle of this one. And that is really cool in my opinion. I make my way through, getting the map pretty quickly as I search for the red mail. Once I got the red mail, the compass, the dungeon map, and the big key, I finally had every item in the game. So now on to Agahnim and Ganon. Like the first Agahnim fight, this one was very easy. And as disappointing as it is how easy Agahnim is to fight, I will say it's very cool to see the first instance of Dead Man's Volley in the series. So we chase after Ganon, although we didn't actually go to fight him right away. First, I headed over to the witch's hut to get some potions, specifically the blue ones, just in case I needed my magic refilled in addition to my health. Then, on to the fight. This is my top 3 favorite final Zelda boss fights, right up there with Demise from Skyward Sword and all of the phases of the final boss in Tears of the Kingdom. You need a lot of skill to hurt Ganon while still avoiding his attacks, and he has a bunch of different types of attacks that you need to learn to counter or avoid. Eventually you reach a point where he makes the room dark and he becomes invisible and invulnerable until you light the torches. Now this is the part I usually struggle with the most, as to light the torches you need to be right on the edge of the platform, and if you're not careful he can knock you into a hole and you need to start the fight over. I almost got knocked in a couple of times, but I got really lucky. And thank goodness that I bought those blue potions, I actually needed them. In this final phase, when you hit Ganon with the Master Sword, he'll turn blue and you need to shoot him with the silver arrows. Hit him a bunch of times with the arrows and he'll explode. And I did it! This was actually the first time that I beat Ganon without getting knocked into the pit, and it felt so good! Finally, after a long and difficult adventure, Link claims the Triforce. He uses its power to put everything right in Hyrule, and this has to be one of the best endings in the series, seeing the world put back how it should be as you look back on all the places your adventure took you across the vast kingdom of Hyrule. One of the most satisfying parts for me was actually at the end of the credits. The game keeps track of how many game overs you get. Well, my counter said 0 because I didn't get a single game over, and this I think was actually the first time that I managed that, so I'm really proud of myself. Since I'm so familiar with this game, completing it really was quite simple. And of course, the game was just as fun as usual. I really am quite proud of myself for beating this game without any game overs. And again, I'm pretty sure that's the first time I've ever done that, even though I've played this game so many times in the past. You probably don't need to hear it from me, as I'm sure a lot of people feel the same way as I do, but I really think A Link to the Past is one of the best games ever made. It's aged so well, and it's still so much fun to play over 30 years after it first released. And that's why I can recommend that if you've never 100% completed A Link to the Past before, you absolutely should. I promise you'll have so much fun doing it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and consider subscribing. Now after completing the SNES title, I'm more excited than ever to continue completing every game in the Legend of Zelda series. Please let me know which game you're most looking forward to seeing me complete down in the comments. Well, until next time, so long!